Amnesty International has flagged social media giant Twitter for failing to do more to prevent the abuse of women users in South Africa. Women surveyed for the study complained that tweets containing hostile content reinforced negative or harmful stereotypes, and they were not being dealt with by Twitter. Victims of online abuse felt that raising concerns about attempts to silence them on the social media platform was a waste of time. Amnesty International, for its part, saying that the company should do more as it has a responsibility to respect and uphold all human rights. Now, the organization's Activism Coordinator, Alicia Jooste, joins us now for more on what is such an incredibly important issue, Alicia, and by no accounts a new issue. And the issue that a lot of the women that you've surveyed, what they've said is that when they've had this kind of experience on social media, what they've done is actually taken a decision to leave Twitter. What does that mean for silencing voices?
Firstly, good morning to you and your viewers. You know, what we're finding, and as you mentioned, if Twitter doesn't step up and do more to protect women, the platform is starting to undermine the right of women to express themselves equally, freely, and without fear. It's having, negative emotional and mental health impact on users. And as you said, it's self-censoring. Women are starting to self-censor. They're limiting their interactions. And it's really going against, the rights to freedom of expression. And that's why we are calling on Twitter to do more to protect women and users in general.
But, the reason why we are talking about its impact on women in particular is because the kinds of attacks that we see on social media and on Twitter in particular, it targets women in different ways. And according to your report, the abuse often contains sexual or misogynistic remarks. It may target different aspects of a woman's identity, such as their race, their gender, or sexuality. So the issue as it pertains to women in particular is one that we're focusing on now.
Exactly. So, what we're seeing is that there is still a gap in how the online space is being regulated, and many people do think that there's a different set of rules online as there is offline, and that's just not the case. Your human rights should be respected no matter where you are. And so similar to violence against women that occurs offline, as you said, the aim of this violence is, and abuse is to create a hostile environment for women with the goal of shaming, intimidating, and even silencing women. And that's what we're finding here is that there's this tension between freedom of expression and hate speech. And Twitter's not quite getting that right in holding those two accounts that are going towards the side of hate speech.
So if you compare Amnesty International's scorecard for Twitter for 2021, now fast forward for 2020, fast forward to 2021, what are some of the outstanding issues that Twitter is just not getting to grips with?
So it's largely around transparency, particularly around two areas: the abuse reporting process. So what we're hearing from users is that when they are reporting abusive content, they're met with the inconsistent enforcement of Twitter rules. So what we need to be seeing is an increase in transparency around this process, including how much data, including data that shows us responses that have failed, reports that have failed to receive a response, and reports that were reviewed but were found not to be in violation of community guidelines, and why. Secondly, as content moderators sit at a global and regional level, we do want to see greater transparency around their capabilities and capacities. It's so important that a country's context is taken into consideration when moderating content, including what languages, South African languages, the content moderators cover. Do they have an understanding of our social, cultural, political context, taking into consideration our high rates of gender-based violence, and how many moderators are covering South Africa specifically? So we do think that there is a capacity issue there, but there's just no transparency.
When we're talking about abusive content, Alicia, and problematic content, what's the kind of content we're talking about here?
So, it's content that is, I guess if we look at the intent behind it, where we're looking at abusive posts that target women directly when it comes to race, gender. So it is just, abusive videos. It's in all formats and in all kinds of content. We do need greater transparency from Twitter around this, and that's another gap there. When we know that there's abusive content going on, we're hearing from our participants in the interviews, but we're not really sure of the extent of it at this stage.
You've also, in your Twitter scorecard, noted experiences of some South Africans, women in South Africa, some of them journalists, others in the social media space. Karen Morn is one of the well-known journalists that you've cited in some of the research that you've done as well. She says, according to this report, that she's had to censor what she shares on Twitter after another user with the handle Death2KM contacted her sister, claiming to have killed her. I mean, that's got to impact incredibly on what you share on social media, which is a valuable tool that all of us, particularly in the media space, rely on in many ways.
Exactly. So Twitter is a powerful way to express ourselves, and I do apologize for my dog in the background. And that's why it's so important that Twitter does need to step up and take responsibility to safeguard the freedom of expression, as in this case it is. If women are leaving the platform and facing that kind of abuse, it is limiting how they engage in a society that is so tech heavy, and requires the ability to engage digitally.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are mechanisms on Twitter to filter. You can mute people who are particularly abusive. But sometimes, and according to the experiences of the women that you've spoken to, it's really a case of going onto the platform and gritting your teeth for what's to come.
Exactly. And, it shouldn't get to that stage. And in many ways, it does require us as a society to look at ourselves and what kind of behavior, we accept as a society, and that peer-to-peer conversation. So it is in part, the issue that we have more broadly with violence against women in South Africa. But certainly, Twitter does need to be doing more right now to protect women.
Yeah, I want to just ask you one final question as we close off our interview, Alicia. We're not asking for Twitter, and Amnesty International has said the same thing. We're not asking for Twitter to be cancelled, but do you reckon in your engagements with them, and I've got your letter to Twitter as Amnesty International here and their response as well, certainly on the face of it, in terms of Twitter's response, it does appear that they are open to these kinds of engagements and open to making the kinds of changes that you and other organizations have been calling for. But in reality, are we seeing enough of a change there?
Yeah, and we continue to hear from Twitter that they are committed to this. But, once again, we need to see more action. We need to see more resources being put towards this. So we are hopeful, but at the same time, yes, we do need to see more to kind of back up their commitment to do more. So our conversations with Twitter are ongoing, and we'll continue to release these scorecards until more progress has been made to protect women online.
Yeah, incredibly important work there. Alicia Jooste, thanks very much indeed for your time. Amnesty International's Activism Mobilizing Coordinator. Perhaps you can also share your own experiences as a woman on social media with us at Newzroom 405.